Good afternoon and good morning to everyone that's joining us today for our Executive Spotlight Series. As you know, ASAP Talent occasionally interviews executives in the marketplace. Some are CIOs, some are CISOs, some are tech entrepreneurs that might be running like an SAP consulting firm. And so we really are trying to mix it up. Today, we want to welcome Tammy Moskites, a well-known and tenured CISO, has worked at some really large corporations, has sat on boards, sometimes for cybersecurity product companies or corporations, and then now owns her own business as well, which we'll talk about today. So Tammy, welcome, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Absolutely. So, just tell us a little bit, if you can, Tammy, about your career in cyber, and then also what you're now doing with CyAlliance, if you can.
Sure. I'm not going to go back through my whole career because we'll be here for a week. It's interesting because I started my career as administrative assistant, which a lot of people don't even realize. So it's kind of interesting, the growth pattern over these years. I was in actuarial for a while and ended up in security, but it's very common. If you think about actuarial, average likelihood of an event to occur is death, right? You do an underwriting for those, but now average likelihood of an event to occur, breach or other things. So security has always been a focus of mine. I've been in IT and managed everything from help desk to desktop support to creating identity access management teams over the years. It's been a blast.
What types of companies have you worked at in the last 10 to 15 years? Any companies that maybe some of the people joining us today might have heard of?
Yeah, so I was at Home Depot, Time Warner Cable, Huntington Bank, Accenture, Venafi. And like I said, I'm the CEO of my own company now called CyAlliance.
One thing I love about your background, Tammy, you've been in corporate America as an internal CISO and IT leader. You've been on consulting services with Accenture, as you mentioned. You have at times worked with cybersecurity product companies. You probably have some chops in product development. You've sat on boards. So today's discussion, a lot of what we're going to talk about is about careers. How do you manage your career as a CISO? Some of it could be very relevant to any IT executive or any person managing their career. So anyone could be watching today. But I like that you have all these different experiences and you bring that to the table in the discussion today. Tell us a little bit about CyAlliance, because now you own your own business and that's a little bit of a different deal. What's going on with CyAlliance?
Well, it's interesting. We started CyAlliance right before COVID hit, right? So it was October 2019, I guess. So we're just on 4 years. Gosh, I can't even believe it's been 4 years. But what we were focusing on was bringing the best of the best services and executive support to tech companies or people that are companies that are just coming out of stealth, or companies that were just trying to get to the next level or increase their annual recurring revenue. And then what I was working with was companies globally about, working with their boards, working with their executive teams. How can we improve your portfolio? How can we look at your projects and programs? And then a few months into our company, COVID hits, and then companies obviously everything shut down, right? So we had to find ways where we could still help CISOs and companies improve their security posture and technology posture, but also make sure that CISOs and CIOs and technology people had a way to come together and still communicate. And we were very successful. We were super lucky. We have a great group of partnerships, and we have some investment companies now within the CyAlliance portfolio. We have companies that actually partner with the CyAlliance portfolio, and we work with them in 3 things. It's those portfolio partners. We help them increase their brand awareness. The second piece is to help increase their pipeline and their sales team understand the view of the CISO or the voice of the CISO or CIO. And then most importantly is help them increase their annual recurring revenue.
Yeah, I love what you guys are doing. I love that you travel around to different parts of the world and different major cities and, host CISO events, do some event planning and that kind of thing. You guys, I mean, I see CyAlliance as a thought leader in the industry. You guys are bringing new ideas to the market, and we appreciate what you're doing. I'm biased because I've kind of been part of that CyAlliance, suite of tools and products. And Tammy and I have worked together on, helping companies with CISO and cybersecurity searches. And we first got to know each other when we were doing a board search, a public board search for CISOs, and that's how long that we've known each other. So
it's been a long time for sure,
it
but
has.
I think that piece of our relationship, especially around, I have a different view, right? Because even though I'm on this side of the table now, I've been a CISO for a big majority of my career in multiple industries. So being able to have that trust factor and knowing what what the customer wants. If they're hiring a CISO, I know what they need. If they're hiring an engineer, and being able to balance that fit after myself hiring thousands of people in my career, you learn, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's shift a little bit into it's 2023, it's September, college football and NFL football, and the seasons are changing. And for many people in the country, we're happy that maybe the heat is going to slowly slip away and get into fall weather. So that's where we're at, and it's 2023. Tell us how you see the economy, the market. How does that translate to the IT market? How does it translate to the job market for CISOs and cybersecurity in general? How are you seeing the market right now?
Well, with the big impact that we've had just in general from an economy perspective, we all know the economy is not so great right now. So, I mean, in candor, right? It's tough. Lots of layoffs, lots of restructuring, lots of doing more with less again, which, this is a different swing. Even during COVID, we were seeing growth in hiring actually. And now we've seen stops and slowdowns in a lot of industries, especially in tech, IT, and even in some retail industries, we've been seeing some layoffs. So I think that, keeping that in mind, I'm seeing a big shift in what's important to the CISO or CIO in their environment, a little bit more taking a step back and looking at their project portfolio and saying, what actually can we get done this year? And what can we push off till next year? Obviously, you can't do more with less if you're running a lot of projects. So I've been seeing from that piece of it, I've been seeing it slow down a bit. Is there some hiring? Absolutely. Don't get me wrong, but it's kind of in different industries are hiring more than others is what I'm seeing. But the other piece of it is that salaries are leveling off a little bit, dropping in some cases. And projects are, like I said earlier, but they're slowing down. But the project pieces are, here's all the tools I have. And they're starting to do more assessments of here's what I have. And I have all this stuff that costs me millions of dollars. What can I trim down, or what new products are coming into the industry that can replace the legacy stuff I've had in place?
Yeah, we're still seeing companies that are going through digital transformation efforts. Sometimes it's modernization of systems and applications. Yeah, and I would mirror what you're saying in that it's a weird economy / market right now. One of the weirdest ones I've ever seen, because I've been recruiting since '99, and I've been through a recession before, '09. Now in that recession, you had lots of layoffs. It wasn't correlated with super high inflation. And in that recession, unemployment was above 6%, 7%. So there was quite a few there were some opportunities out there, but there was also more people competing for them.
Right.
Unemployment, most people would say, is pretty low right now, but you also see that, okay, you still see some hiring freezes and some slowdowns. You see the high interest rates. It doesn't feel like a great economy. But unemployment also isn't that high. So it's a weird market. Now, we have seen more CISOs reaching out directly to us in the last few months. So anecdotally, there are people now, sometimes they're employed, but the amount of people that are kind of keeping their options open, seeing what's out there, seems to be pretty high right now.
It's very it's very high. I get reached out by CISOs almost every day, it seems like, and they're like, "Hey, Tammy, what are you seeing in the market? What's new? Hey, keep your eye open in Texas. Keep your eye open in
That's
Virginia,
right.
whatever." And they're like, "Hey, we're relocating. My family plans to relocate to the Florida market. Is there anything happening down there?" So they're actually thinking ahead a little bit now too. The CISOs, like you said, they're keeping their options open. But some of the hybrid stuff isn't hybrid anymore, right? Some of the companies are really wanting people to come in. So
There have
that's
been so many shifts, and that's a great point, because even just in the last 4 years, we went from not many virtual hybrid roles to COVID. Everyone was like trying to adjust, and how are we going to keep moving, keep the ball moving? Well, then you saw an increase in hybrid, in virtual, and now you see that slide back, right? We're seeing that slide back where, okay, pandemic's over, time to get back into the office. Not to say that there's no virtual or hybrid, but we're seeing a slide back. So someone in the market that's looking might think that it's 2 years ago and go, oh, it's easy to find a hybrid role, or it's easy to find a virtual role. I don't know.
It's
Not as easy as it was 2 years ago.
No, it's definitely more difficult.
Yep.
And I'm seeing it more and more.
Yeah, no, those are very good points. Let's also put just a little bit of historical perspective for anyone that's listening. How have things changed in an internal org chart? How has the CISO role changed in just even 10 to 20 years? Back when it used to report to the CIO, and how many times now is it not? How have you seen things change over 15 to 20 years as it relates to the CISO and in maybe the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 space?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it has changed, right? I think back about, early 2000s even, where the CISO title didn't exist. I remember writing a job description with one of my companies that this is what I do. They're like, there's no chief security officer. That's not a real job. And I'm like, but it is. Like, no, it's not going to be a real job. So that's like just thinking back like 2005, 2006. I mean, that's not that long ago.
That's not really that long ago, but my, how things have changed,
And I think that even with the chief security officer or chief information security officer, or whatever you want to call it, if you look at that job title and what we've done, anecdotally, what have we done as a leader, right? We have become very tactically focused security leaders about locking things down, putting controls in place, less about compliance early on, but more about how do we stop viruses, right? How do we make sure that our antivirus is up to date? I would say it's a security tactical job, right? We were trying to build controls around identity and other ways that people. So that's back in the day, I would say, with the lock and key kind of approach, where you always.
It was about network security and email security and protecting, that kind of thing. And it was thought of like that. I mean, it was thought of as very IT-ish.
It was less business focused, right? And so as you move the years on, right, we became more and more business integrated. And the reporting structure, even today, a lot of them still report to a CIO. You know that as well as I do.
Which does still happen, yes.
Which becomes problematic, even in the Fortune 500. I mean, the only good thing that's come out of the last few years is the CISO salaries have increased. I think they're leveling off again. From what I've been seeing, some areas have dropped a little bit, but most of it are leveling off. But I think that they're getting more time with the board and more time focusing on how we put compliance and controls and regulations and the business needs, right? And what's the acceptable risk to the business, and being able to put it into a business focused decision-making process. So we know, what we need to secure and protect and what things we don't have to as much. But I think that they're getting a little bit more respect in the market. But I also think that they're finally at a point now where it's a must-have, right? You have to have a security leader in your organization, especially if you're a Fortune 500 company. It's not a nice to have; it's a must-have.
Yeah, and as we'll shift back to more of the individual and their career, but how the market has changed impacts where people can be in 10 years now than where they could have been in 2000. There are more CISO roles now, when it used to maybe be that the highest role was a VP of security. There's deputy CISOs now, and then directors of security and compliance. And for CISOs that 20 years ago didn't get a lot of board representation, now they got to maybe quarterly go in front of the board. Well, now we're seeing CISOs sit on the board and get these paid board positions, public board of directors positions. And so that does play into, where do you see yourself in 10 years, 15 years? What can a career path look like in 2030? What can a career path look like there? And how is that different than it used to be in 2000? What advice or thoughts and guidance can you give to folks that are watching our podcast now, thinking to themselves, yeah, I need to be thinking about where I'm going to be in 5 to 10 years, and what do I need to do today to set that roadmap up for myself, for my career? We all do things strategically within the companies we work at, but how much time do we put in per year thinking, how am I going to manage myself? How am I managing my career? What advice do you have for folks, Tammy, on that subject?
For anybody that knows me knows this is probably one of the most passionate things I'm about. It's about, I even speak at it at conferences. I'm actually going to be speaking similar at ISACA conference in Ireland next month, just on this topic. So it's kind of interesting. It's called Goals for Success. I'm in a process of actually putting this all into book format at some point in my life, if I ever get
awesome.
Yeah. So, but with that, it's basically what Goals for Success is all about, is looking, obviously about goal setting. So what's my 1 to 3 year-ish goal plan? What's my 5 to 10 year goal plan, 10 plus years? Everybody says, what happened to the 3 to 5 part? When I go to say, that's the ish part, right? Because it gets a little fuzzy in between 3 and 5 years. But it's really taking a look, not just at work, but work and personal, and say, what is my goal? What's the job I hope to have? Where do you want to be in your career? Where do you want to live? Can you relocate now in 3 years? If you have kids in school, maybe not. So maybe that might move to a 5 to 10 year goal. Where do I want to be when my kids are out of the house, right? And it's all looking at that and keeping it live. Like every day, take a look at every few days. Like, hey, is this the job I hope to have? Am I having fun? Where do you want to be? What do you want, a leadership role or not? We switch a lot in that role as well. So it's really writing down those goals, knowing where you want to be and asking those questions, and, and not being afraid to. It's just thinking about where you want to be, and then kind of taking that observation piece, the O piece in the goals, and observing what others are doing. So watching others. How do you want to emulate, people that you respect? I want to be a manager. I want to run organized meetings. Things I don't want. I don't ever want to be a pen tester. Or I don't ever want to be a leader. And it's kind of continually focusing on all of those things. But then, you look at the adjustment piece of your goals, and that's the A, right? And you go kind of into adjust your goals, adjust your observations. They're going to change. We changed. I mean, when I started out back when I was 18 years old, I wanted to be Julie on the Love Boat. For people that are old enough to know what that is, right? But I wanted to be, I kind of do event coordination now, right? But that's what I want to do. But keep them current. You're going to change your directions a million times. And the L part is loving what you do, right? So making sure you're continually loving. But there's ways through it. It's keeping focused. It's writing it down with a piece of paper and a pencil. It's not always typing it. But it's also making sure that you're focused on what makes you excited every day. Like what wants you.
I love what you're talking about, Tammy, because, really smart people, smarter people than me, have said that, if you love what you do, then it's not work. Follow your passions. Mm-hmm. I think that's a part of the equation that is sometimes lost on some people, and what you were talking about reminded me, I have a business coach, and we were talking about how, if you're going to do a business plan, it's amazing how many people that run businesses don't even do business planning, right? First of all, that was her number one thing, was it's amazing how many people don't do business plans. And then it's amazing how many people do a business plan and then they never look at it again. Right. So we were talking about how, you have to set aside a little bit of time, whether it's every week or every month or every quarter, to focus on things around your career or where do I want to be. And for a business owner, you have to occasionally reassess, am I achieving my business goals? If not, why not? What am I trying to achieve this quarter, this month? I think it's similar in your career. Like if you don't write it down, if you don't occasionally think about it, then we can't really be surprised when we don't reach the goals because we never really had them and we never really measured them. Like a goal should be measurable and obtainable. You should write it down, have accountability partners, and you should occasionally assess, okay, I said I was going to do this, this, and this. Well, did I do it? Or did I work towards it? If not, why not? It's like in inspecting what we expect.
No, you're exactly right, because every day I'm looking for, I work with people all the time. I work with executives because I do a lot of mentoring, as you know, and a lot of success planning for people, succession planning for their organizations, et cetera. And that's one thing we talk about is, are you where you want to be? And if you're not, you got to live to your strengths and your superpowers, and your superpowers are going to change.
True.
Yeah. Right. So you got to make sure that you just, stay passionate. With CyAlliance, who the heck would have thought 4 years later, I'm having fun every day. And I host a lot of events and I travel and I complain about it all the time because I'm on the road every week. But I don't know if I could stop, that as much as I do.
One thing that, if I look at your career just as a professional search guy, is it's evolved. It's changed over time. And one of my favorite quotes or sayings is, if you're not growing, you're dying. The reason I love that quote is I think it's human nature. When we think about sustainability or we think about growth or learning, is if we remain very stagnated, if we stay in the same role, the same level of role, we're just comfortable and we're no longer growing, that actually is the same as dying. And so I think there's an internal yearning for most people and growth can mean different things. Growth can mean increasing your compensation. It can mean title growth. It can mean more responsibility, but it can also just mean not doing the same exact thing, and you have really grown and shifted in your career. And I think that's part of human nature.
Yeah, I've leveraged my experience. You realize that, I've been in everything from tech to security to administrative roles to bartending back in the day to you name it. But I've also worked with tech companies and I've worked with like Accenture from a consulting. So I'm able to see multiple sides of the industry, which a lot of people don't ever get that opportunity to because they stay in the same industry or stay in the same focused job. And I think we all grow, even if we stay in the same job a bit. Personally, I think we grow in our own way, but some people are just comfortable staying in that same role, right? So it's really about your desires, where you want to be, again, looking at those goals in your career and saying, do I want to change my job in 5 or 10 years? Maybe I don't. Maybe I like working 9 to 5 and going home and sitting by the pool every day. It's just really people's, what they enjoy doing.
So Tammy, some folks that could be watching our podcast could be 100% corporate. Mm-hmm. Some could be having worked at KPMG and Accenture and that kind of thing. Some could be working, at some cybersecurity product company, but they've never worked in a Fortune 500 corporate America type role. How do you think it helped you evolve to where you are by getting these different types of experiences? And then what kinds of personality types might fit better into these different types of roles, in your opinion?
Wow, that's a big question, Jeremy.
It probably is a hard one to unpack. Yes.
It's the thing is that when you work for a Fortune 500 company, right, or Fortune 100, Fortune 50, whatever, right, the amount of red tape and the amount of corporate oversight is something that if you haven't done it before, it can become extremely frustrating and overwhelming. And the reason why I say it is because there's more boxes to check. There's more people to accept. You have to get collaboration and agreement across so many different places. Procurement is slow. Legal is slow. Everything's slower. I don't care what anybody says. There's more people, but it's slower. Good thing is usually the budgets are bigger, right? So you have a bigger budget, but things are slower. I think that some people coming from a tech industry or a small tech company jumping into a CISO role in a large company like that can find it overwhelming at times. But they also have to make sure that they're keeping a business focused hat, because when you're working in smaller companies, you tend to be more tactical, day-to-day, hands-on. Whereas when you go into a larger company, you're going to have to focus on the business needs and all of that. So with all of that being in play, I think that that's going to be kind of the bigger challenge. And sorry about the dog barking in the background if you heard them.
That's okay. During COVID, we all got used to the occasional life happens, right? Even when we're doing a video podcast. Yes, I have Tammy. I have three, or no, I have three dogs. Two of them are German Shepherds, and one is a large golden doodle. So I mean, we totally love the dogs, and we get the pet thing here at the Slice Morass.
I got a 100-pound Rottweiler in the background, so he thinks he's 4 pounds.
My favorite dog as a kid was a Rottweiler. I had one growing up, and those were great dogs. So yeah, I think that's that you bring up some very interesting points.
But I think when we look at just a quick intersect on that though, when you're looking at going into, like you were saying about being in the consultative area, like with Accenture or coming from a KPMG or something like that, it's a very different world. And no matter what you're doing there, especially at the top of the house, there's a lot of sales involved, which I wasn't even aware of. And that's something that I wasn't as comfortable with, right? I'm not a salesperson,
So you kind of went into a role that was a little bit uncomfortable for you, per se, a skill that you felt like was underdeveloped maybe. Over time, did you get better at that, having gotten that Accenture experience?
Well, I think the Accenture experience taught me different things, right? It taught me to be a better business person, because I had to focus on things slightly different, looking at numbers a different way, looking at it wasn't a complete like OpEx, CapEx kind of thing from a Fortune 500 company that I worked at, right? I was looking at how other companies were going to be taking that expense dollars and investing it into Accenture, whether it was services or other things. And it gave me a very good foundation, even for CyAlliance, right? To sit there and say, how does this fit? How can I help the CISO? How can I help the security organization? So for me, it was more of that consultative piece of me that was able to grow a little bit more and looking out. So I thought that was probably, but it's a hard jump for some. I mean, it wasn't an easy jump, right? Like when I was working at Venafi, I was working at a tech company, and I came out of Time Warner Cable and went into a tech company as a CIO and CISO. And all of a sudden I went from these huge, having a big organization, large focus, to a 200 and some odd employee company. And I was like, wow, my organization was that big, right? The company that I managed, right? But I learned so much. So I think it's like you're saying, I always have on the tagline of my thing, do what you love what you do. I mean, it's really something I'm passionate about. And so when I look at that, it was really taking a step back and saying, is this important?
Awesome. I'm going to jump around on some different questions just because you kind of bring so much, to this discussion. So jumping around to like the board stuff, because quite a few CIOs and CISOs might be watching this podcast. And why did you decide to start looking at board stuff? At what point in your career were you? And then how? Let's say that you haven't done it, but now you want to. How did you go about it? What was the value to you? Why were you interested in it? Tell us a little bit about, sitting on boards.
Well, they're different. I like to sit on nonprofit boards mostly, or companies that haven't gone public yet. Basically, I think that for me, that's the most exciting piece of it, is watching them grow or go to an IPO or get to where they need to be. But it's also, it's taking time out of your day and knowing that you're making a fundamental difference in that company with a voice. Now, for me personally, now my goal moving ahead, because I've sat on a lot of boards, like, I want to get on a couple of corporate boards, and that's kind of Tammy's. Like if I look at Tammy's focus, the reason why I'm saying that this is my focus. I want to get on a couple of corporate boards, right? Paid boards, right? Because that's where I am in my career. When you go into some of these early boards roles and trying to learn, especially if you're going into, like a tech company, you know, they don't pay you. Sometimes they'll give you stock options or something like that. But it's a good way for you foundationally to learn things about how the budgets work, how the finance works, how the different levels of the board and the priorities of where they need to be. It's a good learning step. I think that the biggest mistake somebody can do, even as a CISO or CIO or whatever, is jump right into their first board of director seat and never have that experience to understand the different roles and the importance of each of them, right?
I think that's totally true. I've evolved from being a recruiter that had never done a board search to where I started to do some CIOs and CISOs sitting on public boards. So for me, that was my opportunity to learn, how does a board even structured? Oh, there's an audit committee, and oh, there's a nomination committee, and so learning about structure, learning about, that boards meet quarterly, if it's a paid board role on a public board, how does that look and work? And, and then there's nonprofit and more like where you're an advisory board member, but maybe not a public board role, and so there are all these different roles. And I think your point that early on, it might be good to sit on some nonprofit or smaller boards before you're going for that $200,000 a year Fortune 100, board. Well, will you even have a chance to land on that board yet, right? And so you need that seasoning, you need that career management to set yourself up to where now, okay, eventually I am looking like I'm a really good possibility for those kinds of boards.
Yeah, and the problem with some of the board seats, a few years back is that some of the boards were just trying to fill a demographic on their board. I had that experience with one of mine where I went through an interview process for a public board seat, and they did, Tammy, you don't need to actually come to the meetings. And so they're asking different things, and I walked out with the CEO, I walked out of the interview process, and he's like, where are you going? I go, you want a female over 40 CISO to sit on your board, but you don't want me part of the audit committee. You don't want me part of the risk committee. I don't have to attend anything. I just need. And so basically,
just checking a box. That's not cool. And look, it's true that publicly traded company, as a search guy, do we oftentimes hear that, hey, we'd really like, a diversity selection on this board? And if they have 10 white guys on their board, I get it. And you're publicly traded, you do need that diversity of thought. But you also kind of don't want to be just checking a box where you're not feeling heard or valued. Like, if you are trying to have a diverse board, awesome, but also that we can all contribute and add value and our voices can be heard.
It's super important to have a good mix of voice. And it's not just on a board, right? It's just even in our organizations as a whole, right? I mean, I never hired a demographics. I just don't. I don't hire the people I always had a diverse group of organizations, and I never gave it any thought. I always hired the best person for the job. That's the way that I do business. But even when we place people at CyAlliance, because Jeremy, we worked on things together. I mean, we have amazing placements, which we're very fortunate about. But even better yet, when I've been working with you and your team, that we've placed some CISOs, architects, engineers over the years, and I think that we do it a little bit differently, right? Think about it. I mean, we have guarantees, we have placements, and it's that same piece of it is that excites me every day. It's that we get that opportunity to help companies actually, look at the best of the best for them, and even in a board seat perspective.
I love the idea with CyAlliance because I felt like in the marketplace there was a void that let's say you have a CISO opening and you're really having a deficit within your company. Well, these kinds of high-level executive searches can take a while to fill sometimes, 3 to 4 to 5 months even. And I thought it was really cool, the idea of that you could have a former CISO kind of with a company like CyAlliance do some CISO advisory services to hold the fort down for 3 to 6 months, while we also have a search effort to replace and refine your CISO, and to have a former CISO involved in that whole process. I just thought, I don't know that there's many firms that can do all of that all within one service offering.
Right, and I think what made it a little bit interesting the things that we've been talking about specifically is that we're able to go in and actually foundationally get them ready for the new CISO, right? take a look at their staffing levels, look at what their projects, build that project portfolios. Like, here's what you're working on, here's where your budgets are, and have, when that CISO comes in, right, they can see the budget, they can see the tools that they're using, they can see their staffing, and just get things level set and ready for them to, do their first 90 days.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you two really, in my opinion, interesting questions, because, these are kind of, someone on the podcast could be a CEO or a chief HR officer or a CIO, and they're in a position to do some hiring.
Yeah.
You, having been the CISO on the other side that's looking at these opportunities, what kind of mistakes have you seen companies make in their own hiring, in their messaging? They're trying to attract talent, but they're messing up in the process. And I think it parallels with the question, okay, you're the job seeker. What kinds of things are you asking? What kinds of questions? What are you looking at to say, if I'm going to be interested in that company, here's some things I'm really looking at. And here are things that would be red flags or warning signs, possibly. Any thoughts on that subject?
Well, I think that when job seekers, the people that are looking for jobs at any level, and I'm not just at the executive level, I'm going all the way down, is that we're still seeing big issues with job requirements and job postings and the way they're written. The requirements are, having certifications for entry-level position can't happen half the time, right? And that can't be in the requirements, right? It should be in the nice to have.
Nice to have, but if it's a bona fide qualifier, if it's in a must have, then some people that you might be interested in just aren't going to even apply, right. Or that the HR has to rule them out because you put it in the must haves when it should have been a nice to have. Yeah.
Right. And so I think that when you look at, those specific things, requiring a college degree. A lot of people don't. I don't have a college degree.
It's funny how many thousands or even millions of resumes I've seen in 20 years. I would venture to say 20 to 30% in the IT space do not even have a degree. Some of them have become directors, VPs, and CIO and CISO. And then also some have a degree in art or history or sociology or psychology. It's not that the degree determines the career path.
Right. No, like I said, I started college originally for travel and tourism and hotel management, dropped out of that, went to some computer processing institute, learned how to do RAMIS, JCL, COBOL, and then quickly, those not even usable skills in most, anymore. So for me, I kind of look at it as like, college degree is something, it's, you can have a college degree or equivalent work experience. Or things like that. I think your job descriptions need to be aligned to the level of which people you're hiring.
Did you see much in the way of titles where a company, they try to convince you that it's a CISO role, but they're only willing to make it a VP of security?
They do that all the time. So what happens, what I'm seeing quite frequently, right, is that, it's a CISO equivalent. That's what they always call it. And what the hell is a CISO equivalent? Well, we can only we don't have any more C-level jobs in our company. We have the CIO, CTO, whatever, but we can't have another chief role. So they'll call it, senior director of security, but you can put it on your job title as CISO. It's okay, right? But in HR, it's still listed as a director level or senior director level. It's not considered a corporate level.
If you had to peel that onion back as the candidate, as the person looking at that role, why do you think so many companies do that? Because it's fairly common. What do you think are their internal pressures on why they're doing that?
Well, there's a couple different things. There's liability internally on different levels of, for the C-suite, right? They'll usually maintain a level of insurance on those people in the company. They have
fiduciary insurance and responsibilities.
They also have different bonus structures for those folks, stock level. So there's a monetary piece of it. There's the liability piece of it. And it's just that, some companies just aren't willing to change, right? And
do you think there's an unintended consequence when they mistitle like that to now being unable to actually get some of the people that they really want?
Well, the thing is that they want a C-level employee for a D-level job. I call it
director. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the thing is if you look at it that way, you're asking for a chief information security officer or a chief security officer, right? That job and that role is something that we've built and earned on our own merits over the years, right? This is a skill set. This is a business skill set. So I think that's a big mistake. And a lot of CISOs and a lot of people, Jeremy, you know this as well as I do, as we talk through people, as we hire people and recruit people, the questions they always ask, who does this report to?
Top question. That's a top 2 question when I do a CIO or CISO search.
What is the compensation? What's the total comp package look like, and who does it report to? Those are usually the top 2 questions. And then they get into questions about what is the culture like? Is this replacing another person? Is that person leaving? Is this a new role? You know, so these are all the things that they look at.
That's true. I would add some CIOs and CISOs also want to know about the budget and how the percentage of budget compared to total revenues, because like if it's in a CIO search, they want to know, is it close to 2%? Is it under 1%? Because there's like this magic number that CIOs want to know. And I think in a way, it's telling them, is it a keep the lights on shop? Or is it an innovative, let's drive transformational, like we're going to really see IT as a valued partner to enable the business to achieve its goals, and something about the title is similar. The title and the IT budgets, the title, does it kind of show you that, how do they view cybersecurity? Do they view it as it's worthy of a CISO title, or do they view it where, no, it reports to the CIO?
And it still report to the CIO, like we were saying earlier, it reports to CIO so frequently today. Still, and I
would still say over 30%, around 20 to 30%. Now in the Fortune 500, now you get into Fortune 1000 and privately held, it's even more common probably.
Yeah, it's very common. It's very common. And the thing is that I think that the amount of responsibility from a CISO as a whole, you find yourself, if there's a breach or something else, the CISO does not have responsibility over everything, right? The business makes the decision on the acceptable amount of risk in the company, and the CISO has to provide guidance on how to get there and remediation activities in order to make sure that you're securing and protecting your company to the acceptable level of risk, right? And the CISO gets is the scapegoat. They're the ones that usually, if something happens, it goes directly to them.
Agreed. And so 2 questions that are kind of similar to that. These are quick questions. Why should a company consider having the CISO not under the CIO? If you're a publicly traded company, what's the real reason on why it should be separated out and be its own CISO level role?
Because the CIO is making business decisions around technology, right? They're the business decision makers around what's the acceptable level of risk for their technologies in their company, all right? And the security team, as a peer or even as an oversight of that, is saying, here's the risk that you're bringing to the company, right? What is your remediation activities in order to mitigate these risks? And what do we need to do as a security organization to help you, right? To make sure that you're securing and protecting that. So I think that keeping the CISO separate from these areas, right? Whether it's application development or online banking or customer support or whatever those areas are, all those C-level, CTO, CIO, et cetera, it's a peer, and it should be a peer. I believe this for years. I've been preaching it for years, and it's a peer level role.
I think it falls into the category of the great majority of people have figured that out. It's just a matter of how long is it going to take each company to get to the party. In other words, that is the right answer, although some companies may resist or be slower to adapt that philosophy. And sometimes it's after certain things happen that really burn them badly. Yeah. Like people are more apt to change after a disastrous situation than they are, sometimes they got to get burned or this or that, or an SEC, an incident, a reporting incident, a this or that. Similar question, but slightly different. Why should a large Fortune 500, publicly traded company have CISO representation on their board? I know CISOs, go in front of the board quarterly. That's common. But why should they consider having CISO representation on the board?
Well, that's a great question, because your CISO can come in and go through the risks and other things that are going in. They come in and everybody has their board dividers, right? So here comes the CISO. Here's your section of the board deck for today. But understanding what they're telling you, both from a business perspective and how it will impact you financially, brand, etc. It's important to have somebody on the board to be able to ask those questions back to them, right? And be that conduit within the board saying, hey, they need to spend this money and this is why. So when we're having that board discussion without the representation from the C-level suite coming in and presenting to us, that separate session said, hey, we probably have to find ways to allocate more money to this, or this project will take our brand and our company to the next level, but the amount of technology and security investment that needs to be made to implement this brand new thing to make our company better than our competitors will require investment. And that investment piece of it, and the desire to make it better, more secure, the technology better, having that smartness on board is going to be really important.
I think you're totally right. And it's like, one easy way that I try to explain it to some people is that some of the traditional boards and the types of people on those boards, they are experts in something, right? So a CFO is absolutely an expert in finance and accounting, and so on and so forth. But when you might not have the right people on the board, they actually just literally might not even know the right questions to ask. We look at, if anyone's ever watched Senate hearings on AI, and you watch some person that clearly doesn't even know what they're even talking about. They don't even have the ability to even know what questions to ask. Right. And I think that's one of the things by having CIO and CISO representation on a board, is they're more likely to know what questions should we be asking when the internal CISO comes in front of the board quarterly, and having a third-party independent person.
It's just not the CISO coming in. You have the CIO coming in. You might have the CTO. You have technology coming in. You have business partners coming in. But when you have somebody seasoned on the board that actually has that business sense, right? For me, growing my business expertise over the years and being able to run business as well as security and IT within these corporations made me more successful in being able to get stuff done. And it just the same thing on the other side is what I've said on boards, and I'm sitting there going, wow, it's really important for you to know this. Or and then having the right questions to ask. I think that auditing companies sometimes will prep boards. Here's the top 10 questions to ask your CISO. But what good are those top 10 questions to ask your CISO if you don't know if the answers coming back to them means
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, or how to peel an onion back. It's great to ask a question on a top 10 list, but then sometimes you need to continue diving and digging and asking different questions and follow-ups, as we wrap up, Tammy, I want to ask, so a lot of the people on the call, again, coming back to the economy we're in right now, there are more people looking than there has been in a few years. There's deputy CISOs looking for their first CISO role. There's director level people looking for that first kind of VP level role. What I think that not every CISO role is always posted. And, how does one go about working with recruiters? How does one network? What kinds of tools are out there nowadays? Any advice, guidance, and counsel to the person out there that's like, I find myself right now looking to make a move? What kinds of things do they need to be thinking about from a tactical standpoint, a strategy standpoint of how do you uncover and learn about these awesome roles that might be out there in the market that we're in today?
You're 100% right that most of them are not out there. And a lot of the CISO gigs, CIO, very high level, the high level ones, they post them out on LinkedIn. I go on LinkedIn all the time. There's great CISO jobs listed out there, deputy CISO jobs. But the most important thing is to make sure you're keeping yourself connected in the network in which you want to work, right? So if you're in security, being involved in ISACA, ISSA, other types of ISC squared, other types of organizations that are security driven, get yourself a damn good mentor, right? Find yourself a mentor, reach out to somebody that you respect outside of your company, right? Don't go to your boss, go to somebody else outside the company and say, hey, here's the things that I think I'm great at. can you be candid with me? And that's what mentors do, right? They'll provide that feedback. So find a good mentor. LinkedIn's always a great place. Networks, obviously, like I said before, are good. Reach out to recruiters. I think that you can go both ways. I mean, I know, Jeremy, you have people that reach out to you all the time.
Yep.
I have people that reach out to me all the time. Do I have jobs to place all the time? No. But it's also, I also hear about a lot of things. We hear about a lot of things in the marketplace, and I work with a lot of companies and other people do. So as Justin being in the CISO world, we kind of know what jobs are coming up and what's not. But I would say over half the CISO gigs are not listed out there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Sometimes they use an executive search firm. It's not public knowledge. It's not on their website. People can be aware when a new CISO starts somewhere. Oftentimes it's listed and posted in a business journal when they like to promote a new hire into an executive role. So if you're a CIO or a CISO, be aware of when new CISOs and new CIOs start somewhere else and look at where do they come from.
Yeah, right? That's also a great thing, because good percentage of the time if they went from company A to company B, that job at company A is potentially starting a new search. In some cases, I've been seeing more and more as the CISOs give their notice and then they kind of help kick off the search. So that kind of, there's kind of that courtesy piece in there because the CISO world is small. But there's not just the CISO gig. It's just even just some individual contributor roles. That, if there's companies that you're passionate about, go out to their webpage and look at their career section, right? Go out to LinkedIn, look under careers and jobs for that company.
One thing I would mention as someone that owns a search firm is, if I'm giving advice to a college grad that wants to get into cybersecurity, I'm talking about looking for paid internships and get the experience first. How important it is that you choose the right position and company and opportunity that could set you up for where you really want to be in 5 to 10 years.
100%.
Well,
100%.
Yeah, and similarly, if you're already at a higher level, let's say that now you're at a director level, and you are so focused on wanting to get a CISO role that you're ignoring the deputy CISO roles at Fortune 500 companies. If it's a strong number 2 role with an absolutely well-known large organization that has a good cybersecurity reputation, where you can work right under one of the top CISOs in the whole country, like, I know that's the number 2 role, but you might do yourself a big service by taking that role.
You'd be foolish not to take it. And I tell
people
all the time, and they're like, oh, well, I'm really looking for that CISO title. I'm like, listen, you've worked in companies that are 300, 500, under 2,000 employees. And now you're looking for a CISO gig in even if it's a, Fortune 500, 1,000, Global 1,000, whatever. I was like, you would benefit from taking that deputy CISO role or even that senior director role over a piece of an organization, because that organization, even as a director or senior director, is probably larger than the organization as a whole that you came from. So
yeah, looking at size, scope, and scale of role, not only title, because size, scope, and scale could be a major win for you underneath a CISO that is nationally known as like a top 50 CISO, for example, and then who you're working with to set you up in your career. We see in college athletics or the NFL, you'll see a coach that used to be a head coach of a college football program. They didn't do so well. One of them that comes to mind is Lane Kiffin, and then he went and worked under Nick Saban. Well, Nick Saban was thought of as a top 2, top 3 coach in the last 20 years in college history. He worked under him for a couple of years as an offensive coordinator, and then now he's the head coach at Ole Miss, right? Yeah. Well, sometimes similarly in our careers, we have to think of it just like that. If I can get with an awesome organization in a strong number 2 role, and look at size, scope, and scale, don't only get focused on title, is something that's important. You look at financial services, sometimes certain industries just will resist that CISO title. We see a lot of SVP or VP type titles in banking, and I know you were at Huntington National Bank. And so you have to kind of throw title out a little bit and look at organizational structure, level of impact. Am I the number 1 or number 2? What's the size, scope, and scale of the company? And then how could this set my career up to where could I be in 3 to 5 years? You might even be looking at, if I report to the CISO, would I have a good chance to be in the right place at the right time to be their successor? Are they retiring in the next 2 to 3 years?
I was talking about earlier about, and we do that a lot. I do that personally a lot with companies. Is I'll sit there with their executive team. We'll spend a couple of days in an offsite, and we help them build their succession plan, right? And where do they need to be, and what's their strengths, and how do you have the right people to take over for you? And if not, how do you build that succession plan? I mean, I always say to like my kids, you know, I think about all the people that work for me over the years, and they're all very successful executives. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have Scott Barrington. I mean, he's over at Diebold. He's a CISO there. You know, I have another gentleman that's a CIO, and I have a couple that were CISOs at, you know, large companies all over. And every time I watch them grow into these roles, these are people that were extremely successful, that had a game plan, that had performance plans, that had personal goals that I worked with each day or each week or whatever in our one-on-ones. I still talk to people that I hired back in 1998, right? These people still call me for advice. And so that's why I say is that as a leader and as leaders ourselves, right, we build a reputation to help people. I mean, that's what makes me personally feel successful, right? It's not the money. It's being able to make sure I watch everybody grow in their career. But when you're looking at, you know, some of these folks, like the internships and the paid internships, they're so important. I've had interns that come in and I say, okay, what do you want to be? I want your job in 5 years. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen. You know,
maybe in 15 to 20, but let's set some reasonable goals.
And that's how it is. You know, it's fun to watch the excitement. But I loved hiring interns. It was like my favorite thing to do.
That's great. Well, this has been a great conversation this morning. Could we cover everything in a 45-minute to an hour podcast? No, we could not. Guys, that's why in these podcasts you can comment below. You can ask questions that if it's you know, something I can answer, I'll help out. If it's really CISO specific, Tammy might help out. Feel free to, you know, keep the conversation going in the chat boxes below, and you know, we'll continue to help out. If you have questions about how to ask for a raise, how do you prepare for a performance review, you know, exit interviews, how do you resign, how do you negotiate your offers, how do you work with recruiters? Look, we couldn't cover everything in one podcast, but ask your questions below. Thank you so much for your time today, Tammy. And, you know, just so that everyone knows, upcoming, we will be interviewing a CISO that Tammy and I placed at one of our customers, and he got promoted to a dual CIO CISO role. And so we have an interview with that individual coming up soon. We're going to be interviewing a tech entrepreneur that's built 2 SAP consulting firms, and he was bought by Accenture. His firm was bought by Accenture. So we have some really interesting interviews coming up on the ASAP Executive Spotlight, and I hope you guys will all stay tuned for that. So with that being said, thank you so much for your time, Tammy, and look forward to maybe another conversation in the future.